Welcome to the second episode of Drug Free Australia's Injecting Room Scam series, where in this session, we are looking at the claims of evaluators regarding the numbers of lives saved. Evaluators have convinced politicians worldwide that injecting rooms are a compassionate investment, saving a dozen precious lives each year. Sydney facility was calculated as saving between 4 and 9 lives, Melbourne 14 to 18, and Vancouver's Insight 2 to 12 lives. There are terminal problems with these estimates. Last episode, we saw that the safety of the facilities allow experimentation with drug combinations, which elevate overdose rates from 42 to 102 times higher than on the street. The evaluators also show no interest in the comparison that we have done. So to get vastly inflated numbers of lives saved, they calculate from the vastly inflated numbers of overdose. And it's kind of a drug policy Ponzi scheme, where the vastly inflated numbers are falsely used to create an illusion of sound investment and save lives. Taking the Sydney facility, which has 42 times as many overdoses as on the street, and dividing their saved lives estimates by 42, which is what they should have done, you're back to 1/10 of a life saved per year. That is 10 years to save one life, at a cost to government of 24 million per life, 2.4 million per year. Back at that time, a rehab placement cost the government $23,000, and the cost of saving one life replaces over 1,000 rehab places. Now, the evaluators had to know their saved lives estimates were nonsense. Taking Sydney again, they estimated that there were around 6,000 street injections in King's Cross every day. The injecting room was averaging 64 heroin injections per day, and so only a tiny percentage were there, 1% of all injections in the area. And yet for the 5,930 injections still each day on the streets, there were only 431 overdoses attended by ambulance, while in the room, with only 64 per day, there were 329 heroin overdoses. Anyone can see a Titanic-sized disproportion, and so just who are they trying to fool? You can make your own conclusions. Moving to the Melbourne data, where we have much more precision than with Sydney evaluations, these are the evaluators' own graphs, and the first are overdose deaths 15 months before their injecting room opened, compared with 15 months after. Notice how the evaluators cheat on the labelling. We are in actual fact comparing 5 quarters, and yet they want to put the numbers for 4 quarters to make it appear successful. But clearly, there were more deaths after the facility opened. In actual fact, it's 25 deaths after for the 5 quarters versus 24 deaths for the 5 quarters before. Zooming in to an area with a radius of 1 kilometre around the injecting room, again, we have more deaths after than before, 16 deaths after in the 5 quarters versus 15 deaths for the 5 quarters before. And then an analysis of the areas where the clients mostly live. More deaths after, again, is what we see, 28 deaths in those areas versus 25 deaths before. And so how can they claim the injecting room saved any lives with those increases? The actual data shows that the facilities make no observable difference in any given year. Lastly, let's look at the games these evaluators play to make people think that these interventions are a success. This study in Lancet was published a couple of weeks before the Canadian Supreme Court was to decide on whether the Conservative-led Canadian government would be allowed to close Insight for lack of value for money. So the study in Lancet claimed that Insight had reduced overdose deaths in its immediate vicinity, which was a 500-metre radius around the facility, by 35%. And in the whole of Vancouver by 9%. Now, Insight opened in September 2003, as you can see from our graph over here. And yet, if you look at 2002, you'll see that all of the overdoses are trending upward from that date of 2002 on. Here it is for Vancouver, here it is for the downtown east side, as it is for British Columbia overall. So the injecting room is very clearly not reducing deaths at all. The authors have carefully avoided any graphs like this on overdose numbers in their study, but what they have done is they have used elevated numbers of deaths. And you'll notice that overdose deaths for all of those indicators were all decreasing from 1999 through to 2002 due to a heroin shortage. Now, we have confirmation of that shortage, and here is a study which was done, and you might want to take some notice of who the authors were of that study and compare them with the Lancet authors. Now, this is how they got their decreases, by comparing this time over here of increased overdose deaths as they descended from their high in 1998 with this period over here. And it gives the appearance of decreases when in actual fact they're going up. Now, we'll talk about how they got their 35% reductions close to the facility in the next episode. But you can see how they've been able to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Here is the January 2012 letter in Lancet exposing that study. But Lancet, being a pro-drug liberalisation journal, refused to retract the study. This slide here shows that Sir Richard Horton, the editor-in-chief of the Lancet, is on a science board in an organisation along with Julio Montano, who is one of the chief authors of that Lancet study. Now, here's the kicker. The only review of studies on injecting rooms that only uses injecting room studies with a quasi-experimental design, where any other kind of study I might mention is only pretend science. This is the RAND review. This is one where they had clearly never seen this study's refutation, because they had made it the centerpiece of their support for such facilities. And when you look at that, you might wonder what our politicians are being told. They're not getting the full truth. I'd encourage anyone to check it all out for themselves, following the instructions on this screen. Next episode, do the injecting rooms actually reduce public nuisance?